Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Jewelers Academy podcast. My name's Elin Horgan. I'm a jewellery designer and maker based in Bristol in the UK. I make my own collections, teach in-person classes, and I also mentor on the Jewelers Academy diploma in silver jewellery. I'm really excited about joining Jess's podcast presenters team. So without further ado, let's get stuck into this week's episode. Today, I'm delighted to welcome Ruthie Johnson from Ruthie and Rose. Ruthie is an holistic success coach for ambitious women who want to scale their success without stress, self-sacrifice, or societal expectations holding them back. She's been coaching for over 5 years and has helped hundreds step into what they're truly capable of whilst experiencing more freedom. In this episode, Ruthie and I are going to be exploring some of those mindset issues that I think are really relevant for lots of jewelers and small business owners. We'll get into some strategies for moving forward a little bit later on. But before that, we're going to be talking about and understanding why we do what we do and how it can hold us back. I'm really looking forward to this conversation and I can't wait for Ruthie to share her insights with you. Ruthie, thanks so much for joining me today. Do you want to start by telling us a little bit about yourself and your business? Because I think your own story is really interesting in terms of your experience of burnout and kind of how that led you into coaching.
Yeah. So first of all, thank you for having me, Ellen. I love your jewelry designs. They are like superb. And before we get into any of that fun stuff, but I just wanted to say that. Thank you so much for having me. And yeah, it's been a funny old journey. So where do I start? Well, I've always been a high achiever. So I used to work for a Big Four consulting firm, and very much that high achiever, up or out dynamic, which, as most people who have been in that environment know, it is very hard wearing, not only on the mind, but also on the body. And when I was 25, so I'm 3 years into my corporate career, have left university, been sold this big dream, I hit burnout to the point where I couldn't get out of bed. I literally couldn't function. Like, my body kind of shut down. My mind was in a total state of panic. And I just felt like a complete wreck, really. And that was kind of my wake-up call. So how was I living my life? How did I want to live my life? And what did I really want to step into? And if this didn't feel aligned, then what did? And so at the time, I was super, super into the gym. It was like my safe space. It's where I spent a lot of my time. It's where I connected with people. And it used to be really interesting because I'd show up in the gym and people would be like, "You're so happy." And then they'd mention work. And it was almost like Jekyll and Hyde. So it was quite interesting because as soon as they mentioned work, it was like my face dropped. And so I just knew, like, instantaneously looking back at that something had to shift. But I was also doing bikini competitions at the time. And so I knew that fitness was something I was really passionate about. But the feedback I kept getting from the professional world was, you need to be in a profession and you need to stay in a safe, stable job. I do think that is probably more of a UK-based attitude, that we are very much for a profession. And if someone's successful in something that isn't a professional, like a professional role, we tend to have this kind of instantaneous drawback. But it was kind of in that year. So burnout was in January. I kind of took the year and I was like, what do I want to do? And so in my head, I love fitness. And I actually then found a couple of role models who really supported me in that transition, to see that not only was it possible, but it was also possible to make not only a decent living, but also a really successful living. And for someone who was that high achiever, that was something that I really wanted as well. So at the end of that year, really transformational year of my life, I left my corporate job whilst doing bikini competitions and retraining as a personal trainer, and set up my business. I moved to London from Reading to set up my business as a personal trainer. And thinking that it's all going to go rosy and I've got everything and it's all going to come together, I can only describe the next few years as an absolute car crash. So that was an interesting time for me. My first year of business, within 3 days of me leaving Reading, going to London, starting up my business in a high-profile gym, I got a message from my mum saying, "Come home, I don't think I'm going to make it through the night." Wow. So I was like absolutely in panic. That was her third cancer. And so there was all this going on in the background. So that was her third cancer. So came home, that resolved itself, to cut a very long story short, and went back to London. And then a few months later, my youngest sister, she was 22 at the time, got stage 4B Hodgkin's lymphoma, so cancer. So we had to live through that one. And then in the October, my mum went for the treatment because she put off her treatment for my little sister. So all of this was going on in my first year whilst trying to learn all the skills to run a business. And then thinking that was all over in year 2 of my business, so we're talking 2019, I'm sure you can tell what's coming, my mum passed away. So we got told 6 weeks to live and had to stop my business, put down tools, and yeah, just really take care of myself and my family and really look after everything. Then came back into a business, having had my whole life turn itself upside down. Again, built up a very successful business. So every time there were like these peaks of like 5 to 8K. And so went back in and we got to March 2020. Now we all know what happened in March 2020.
Yeah.
COVID, which was a lot of fun. And my offline personal training business obviously came to a standstill despite doing everything I could. Now, there's a point at which I think you can keep pushing through. And I said this to someone yesterday, sometimes it feels like it's like running on ice. And at some point you're going to crash. And for me, that was October 2020, which is when I had my second round of burnout. And it was a real point for me to reassess. The first time I had burnout, it was like, you have to keep going because you're in a corporate job and you don't want to lose it. Second time, it was like, right, this is the time at which you've gone through grief, you've gone through trauma, you've gone through burnout. Let's stop, let's slow down, and let's reassess what's really going on in your life. And for me, it came back to what is it that I love, which is health and fitness. But also for me, mindset and transformational work has been huge. It's been such a healing part of my journey that I really wanted to combine all that. But I'm also really passionate about women being successful. So a ton of soul searching, a ton of slowing down. My life lesson for the past few years has just been like really slowing down my body, my mind. And actually that has been the real key for me. And it's something that I see women specifically come up a lot against. I tend to find when you ask men what are they thinking, they tend to say nothing. When you ask a woman what she's thinking, it tends to be so many things. Like, where do I even start? Where do I begin? And what I tend to find is as women slow down and they find more space and freedom, they actually are naturally drawn towards success because they're getting out of their own way. So yeah, it's been a fun journey so far for entrepreneurship, but we are here.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think, I mean, obviously, your experiences sound particularly harrowing. But I think certainly the burnout experience is probably something that a lot of us can resonate with, particularly, of course, when people are, and it is often women juggling full-time work, family commitments, caring commitments, and then when you also put running a business alongside that, I think it can just feel completely sort of overwhelming, to the point where you're not even really able to move forward with things. And I think it's interesting what you say as well about sort of taking that time to stop and actually really connect with what it is that you love. That sounds like a really valuable way of looking about it. I've heard you talk about the sort of having it all versus doing it all. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about that? Because I think that's quite an interesting way of looking at things.
Yeah. So I do think this is a uniquely, or mostly uniquely, female problem. Because I remember there was a film with Sarah Jessica Parker that came out a few years ago, and it was like, I don't know how she does it all. And to me, I'm like, I can't do it all. Like, I literally, it's so stressful. And this is my personal belief, so take it or leave it. But I don't believe, especially when people have kids, that there should be a primary parent. I genuinely believe that you're taking, there's a lot of responsibility that women put on themselves to be the perfect mother. And as a result, all the other things that come with it. And I was speaking to a friend the other day, and we were talking about home economics and how home economics is not how to run a household or deal with the bills or all the other stuff, because men used to take part, like men used to look after that. It's how to bake. So, and I'm not against baking. Like, I love Bake Off as much as the next person, but I do think there is a lot of pressure that women put on themselves to be this perfect person, especially when people have kids. It's definitely something I notice with my clients. And a lot of that is external judgment, but we internalize that. So one thing that really stands out to me is people, and especially people, not wanting to be criticized for fear that they will be hurt. But actually, it's our own criticism that hurts the most, because if someone said the sky is green, it's not offensive. It's just someone else's opinion. You're like, yeah, okay, I can move on. But when someone says something that resonates with us about ourselves, especially when it's something that is negative, which may or may not be true, but we buy into it, that's what hurts. And so, digressing a little bit, but this idea of doing it all, I absolutely believe that we can have it all. I believe you can have the relationship, the body, the career, the lifestyle, absolutely. But I think what's confusing about that is the idea that we have to do it all, that we can't lean on other people, that we can't ask for support. And we've become accustomed in this world to bigger, faster, more equals better.
Yeah.
And the truth is, for me at least, simpler is so much better. Slowing down is so much better. I don't see in anyone's vision that there's this rush that I see so many people working through to try and get the next thing done and actually keep themselves in a cycle of fast rather than slowing it down. And so my invitation to all of the people that I work with is, what if feeling behind, which is only a construct in our mind, what if instead of feeling behind, you tried to speed up, you actually took it as an invitation to slow down and get more intentional and enjoy the journey?
I think you're so right there. I think it is about enjoying the journey, isn't it? But I wonder partly whether there's a sort of pressure from, social media. We look on Instagram, we see people with fabulous businesses and they seem to be doing everything, and it seems so easy and, all the rest of it. And actually, you don't see what's behind that. As you say, you don't see if they've got a wider team of people that maybe they're outsourcing things. Maybe they've got, family and friends around them that are helping. It's very easy to sort of see a snapshot. And I think that it touched a nerve with me a little bit there when you said feeling behind, because I think a lot of small business owners almost constantly feel behind. I've got so many things to do. How am I going to get through it? And as you say, you instinctively think, right, I just need to do more. I just need to work longer hours. I need to do more stuff, and then I'll eventually catch up. But of course, it doesn't quite work like that.
Not quite. And absolutely, I think as a business owner specifically, there's always more you can do. It's never ending. And so one thing that I'm seeing with big companies specifically at the moment is almost like this catch-up mentality, that we need to work our people harder, we need to make up for the losses that we had during COVID. But it's exactly the same for a lot of business owners. It's like, I need to get back to where I was. And it's almost like we take it so personally when things don't turn out the way that we were expecting. And we have so much attachment to an outcome, not realizing that actually if we let go, we may open the door for other opportunities. And so, yeah, I totally hear you. And the other thing is, absolutely, with the team, we only have so many hours in the day. And so if your priority is your business or your family, then allow that to be the case. Seasons change, and it's never going to be the same the whole way through. I do feel like a lot of women expect themselves to do everything and then wonder why they're not successful. And I always like this analogy of a rubber band, that you can pull it a lot further in one direction than you can in 10. You can only go so far in so many directions. And then people wonder why they're tired and why they don't have enough energy to do all the things they want to do. And often for me, I always like to think about, what's my most important priority? And it's not right or wrong. I do think there's a lot of judgment on women to have a certain priority list. And it's not right or wrong. If you want to have, go all in on your business, absolutely, that's going to benefit your family down the line. But just knowing where you need to ask for support, what's the priority right now? And even if it's for a month to 3 months, and then shift things, and just be aware that things are always constantly changing. The only constant is change. So
yeah, absolutely. And I think don't be afraid to ask for help. I think
absolutely,
maybe there's this idea, as you said, that you have to you have to be the one doing everything. Otherwise, maybe it's sort of almost somehow cheating if you're not if you're not doing every single element of stuff in your business. But I think particularly, in busy periods that lots of handmade business owners, jewelers will experience, particularly leading up to Christmas, there's absolutely no shame in getting in people to help with packing or sending orders or whatever it might be. I think we all probably need to be a little bit better about asking for help when we need it,
even if it's things like cleaning, or extra childcare. Like I talk about this a lot because I do have quite a few clients who've got very young kids, and so there's a constant pressure. But even if it's cleaning, my boyfriend is a fantastic chef. I cannot cook to save my life. And so he does all the cooking, all the shopping, all the stuff, because number one, he enjoys it, but also it's a way of us both giving back to each other. I know he is not a tidy person, so I pick up the slack there. But finding a balance of what is the responsibility in a relationship. If you're on your own, absolutely. I totally understand that there's a completely different dynamic there, but I don't think it just needs to be in the business. You can also have support in your personal life as well. And so just looking at where you're really getting stuck and what you find yourself getting sucked into, and maybe getting some support there, or just knowing that and setting up a system.
Yeah, absolutely. I think something we touched on really briefly when we were just talking about social media there as well, which I'd really like to talk in a bit more detail with you about, is this whole thing around comparison. We all do it. But gosh, it can be so difficult, can't it, to kind of keep yourself on track when you're looking at what everyone else is doing and it seems so amazing, and you're almost beating yourself up, why am I not achieving what everybody else is doing? Can you talk a little bit more about that, because I think that's something quite interesting to explore in more depth.
I think comparison is one of the most interesting topics, just because it is meant with the best intentions. For most of us, it's a completely unconscious thing. We are constantly comparing ourselves or projecting. And so when I say projections, often we are putting things outside of ourselves. Often we are putting things outside of ourselves to make sure that we're not holding on to it. And so comparison is, you see it a lot when someone is doing really successfully. So coming back to that idea of, if someone's in a profession, we're like, oh, well, they've worked their way up. Whereas if someone's set up a really successful business, and this is the flip side of comparison, if someone set up a really successful business and they're doing really well for themselves, we have a tendency to talk them down, to be like, oh yeah, well, they don't have this, and and I do see a lot of women getting stuck in that element, which is like, oh, I better play small because what if people reject me? And I want to be accepted. And we naturally have this need to be accepted. We live in community, and we need community to survive. But for the comparison side, and I think that's really important just to mention, because as well as comparison moving you forward, comparison can keep you stuck.
Yeah.
And so when I see comparison, often it tends to be people who are very ambitious, who want to go to that next level. And as I said, it's done with the best of intentions, which is to inspire you to move forward. But often what it creates is jealousy and envy, which, if we really look under the hood of that, often is, instead of inspiring because it's creating jealousy and envy, is that there's a belief that you can't have it too. Because otherwise it would inspire you to keep going. And then the other thing is, it paralyzes you. So it keeps you stuck rather than moving you forward, which this what you expected to do. It actually keeps you stuck. And so if you're listening to this right now, I'd just check that out, see if that lands. Because what I tend to see is people set these massive goals and massive visions of what they want, and they haven't broken it down. And so it feels like such a long way to go. So social media is great. We can look at the numbers. So if someone's got 100,000 followers and you've only got 1,000, instead of going, oh, well, they've increased it over time, we go, I don't know how I'd ever get there. Or I don't know how I'd get there. Or they spend too much time on social media. They care too much about what other people think. There's so many ways that comparison can come out, and it can both be about us and like, well, I'll never get there, or we can make it about them.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's that tendency, isn't there, to sort of almost assume, as you say, if it's a business that someone set up themselves, that there's been this sort of one thing that's happened to them that's caused them to be incredibly successful. If only I could do this one thing, then I would be similarly successful. But actually, as you say, it's often just years and years of quite boring, simple, small tasks that build you towards that, rather than thinking actually it's this one thing. And as you say, I think thinking of it like that can also mean that you end up getting stuck, because what's the point if I'm not going to be huge? What's the point of doing anything?
Absolutely. I mean, me and my boyfriend have been having a conversation around being famous, as not for the sake of being famous, but the work that I do. There are quite a few like well-known coaches out there, and he's just got a job with a Formula E team. And it's really interesting because neither of us want to be famous. So he's like, oh, you're going to be famous. And I'm like, no, you're going to be famous, because I don't want that. Whereas for a lot of people, they look at it and go, I want that. And actually, there is something really special about really tapping into what you want your vision to be. And we'll come back to this because I know we're going to talk about strategies, but really tapping into what you want your vision to be, rather than thinking you need all the things to be happy. We all have our unique desires and our unique path. And so yeah, I totally hear you on that. It's just we often buy into what we've been taught to buy into as success, when actually that doesn't necessarily mean that's success for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's always a tendency to be doing things that you feel you should be doing, without maybe stopping and thinking, but who is saying I should be doing them? So yes, that definitely strikes a chord. So I also wanted to ask you about something which I think is really quite a big issue for a lot of jewelers and handmade business owners. Probably what makes us good at what we do, but it's also possibly what can hold us back. And that's perfectionism, our old friend, and particularly how it kind of feeds into procrastination. So, that thing about, are we keeping ourselves stuck in one place because actually we're just really fearful of not being perfect, amazing, the best?
Yeah. And I really hear that, especially in a trade where you're constantly looking for perfection. We could talk about diamonds, for instance, and how we're constantly looking at how we've got the perfect clarity. I can't remember the other ones, but but I know that perfectionism is, again, really well intentioned. And so I find it really interesting when people label themselves like, I'm a perfectionist, and I'm like, actually, no, you're not. That's just a habit that you've built up a long way. Like, genuinely, a lot of the time, perfectionism tends to come with self-criticism or inner critic a lot. They tend to be combined. And one thing I know from just working with my clients and in my own story is that often messy action is better than perfect inaction, or imperfect action is better than perfect inaction. I think that's the phrase. And so when I really look at that, I often see that there's this perfectionism label that we attach to everything. It has to be perfect before I release it, or someone might criticize it, or whatever. But what actually that does is, it paralyzes us and keeps us in procrastination from moving to the next level. And actually that creates a lot of pressure. So we're constantly looking for this perfect thing, when in reality, there is no such thing as perfect. Like, we're constantly shifting, constantly evolving. What you think is perfect now will not be perfect in a year's time. And as you're evolving, especially with something like jewelry, where it's a craft and you are honing it over time, even masters of this, they're constantly perfecting things over time. I'm sure Mozart with his symphonies would again be like, right, how could I change that? If we're looking at things through a lens of improvement rather than does it hit the standard, a lot of the time that takes the pressure off. And so we can begin to play and explore more of the grey, less of the black and white. But I totally hear it. It's a natural protection mechanism for us to stay safe and for us to stay in our comfort zones. And so knowing that it has the best of intentions, I think it's easier to be softer with ourselves, because one thing I notice is when we judge our blocks, judge the perfectionism, judge the procrastination, we actually create more of them and we buy into them, and then we're stuck with them. And so whether it's comparison or procrastination or perfectionism, learning to be with it and be okay with it and know that it means nothing about you, and you can shift it because it's not part of you, it's just a pattern you've picked up, it's then much easier to move through.
Yeah.
And ironically, I think sometimes we sit here and we wait for clarity, or we wait for the perfect thing, and I'm like, actually, you get clarity in action. So we're constantly moving, we're constantly evolving. I've done quite a few interviews this year, done quite a bit with the BBC, and one thing I really know is that I've taken a lot out of those conversations. It's like, what do I want to talk about? What's really important for my audience? Do I want to work with entrepreneurs? Do I want to work with professional women? Is it a mixture of both? What are the values that I really want to bring into my coaching? And just by moving, by taking the feedback and not taking things personally, because again, when we talk about perfectionism, if it's not perfect, then it means something about us, when actually in reality it means nothing about us. All of that, and goals are a direction, and it's more about a process of becoming than about the outcome.
Yeah I think that's really pertinent, because I think it is this, maybe things like perfectionism are almost presented as a personality trait rather than just a belief that you have, that, as you say, is a belief that can be changed. Do you think is it a fear of criticism of others, or is it something more about ourselves that kind of that makes us have these kind of perfectionist tendencies, do you think?
I think, this is my personal opinion, but there's a lot of evidence to back this up. When we are young, so most of our programming, so our individual programming, the I'm a perfectionist or I'm a hard worker or whatever you want to say, a lot of that is installed in us before the age of 7. So it's when our brains haven't fully developed yet, and we tend to pick things up, or things happen and we fill in the gaps. So it's a bit like that car crash scenario, and everyone has a different perspective on it. And so say someone points something out to you when you're 5, you then take that to mean that if I do this, then people will criticize me and that will hurt. When actually it's got nothing to do with anyone else, it's an internal thing. So a lot of the time this perfectionism is being driven from an internal standpoint of, let me make sure that someone else doesn't criticize me because that'll hurt.
Yes, sure. That
and it's the same with anything, but often it's us. So a really good example is when someone says something to you and they mean it as a compliment and you take it as a criticism. So it's got nothing to do with anyone else, it's all to do with our internal world.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, that brings us quite nicely on, I think, to maybe talking about some actual strategies that we could use to overcome some of these things. So sort of thinking about, like, how can we actually build, a really fulfilling, enjoyable, sustainable business that leaves us feeling really energized and enthused, rather than feeling kind of overwhelmed and just burned out. So would you like to share some tips with us? I think that would be really useful.
Yes. So I was racking my brain trying to think about what would really support people in moving forward. And for me, there are probably 4 big ones, especially specifically for this audience. And the first thing I think for any business owner is having a really strong vision, and that being aligned with your values. And so when I say that, my values are growth, balance, self-care, connection, and impact. And so knowing that off the top of my head, I'm like, right, what is my business giving me back just by being in it? I love the growth element of coaching because I'm constantly growing. I love impacting people's lives. I love connecting with people, but there has to be a balance for me so I can really take care of myself, so that I can show other people that it can be done. So there's lots of different elements, but I think often we create a vision that doesn't feel aligned with what's really important to us. And so if you haven't got a vision, absolutely start there, but really make sure that you know what's important to you in your life. And again, values can change, but from where you are right now, creating that vision, that doesn't mean it's the end goal, because visions constantly change as we get feedback, but knowing that you're moving towards something bigger than yourself. is so crucial. And so, and visions are something that you can play like as a mind movie constantly to help you move towards that goal, and actually really support you in tapping into your intuition, to slowing down, finding opportunities, and knowing what's a fit for you. So whether it's a job opportunity, whether it's a client, whether it's a new product that you want to launch, there's loads of ways you can use it. But really having this solid, aligned thing that you want to move towards, even if it changes, is so helpful to pull you forward on the days that are really hard, rather than you feeling like having to push and hustle through and you're not feeling inspired, you're feeling drained.
Yeah, I think that's really useful, and particularly those sort of elements that aren't, as you say, just about the business, but actually what about the business? What's the business giving you as well? And then kind of using that as a way of maybe making decisions in your business. Seems like a really kind of practical way of using it and implementing it.
I always like, with vision, I always like to look at how much do you want to make, what's the lifestyle you want to lead, and how does it light you up. And I think that's a really nice balance, because you're not only looking at the monetary stuff, but also the lifestyle, which for most of us is why we want the money in the first place.
Yes.
So yeah.
Great. Thank you. And yeah, so on to tip
number 2. So number 2 for me is definitely planning and prioritizing. So taking the vision, reverse engineering it, and really breaking it down so it feels manageable. And actually, when we set goals, that I think the evidence and the data shows that it's 85% achievable, and they need to be at least 50% believable. So not really expansive goals where we actually shut down and we freeze and we go into that perfectionism and that procrastination, which on an unconscious level does happen. Having something that really moves us forward is really important. So really planning that out, really having a solid structure, not having too much within it. So I like to have just a couple of things that are really going to move the needle, and making sure that they are diarized is so important. So really prioritizing that in your schedule. I like to say what gets diarized gets done. So just really moving it through. So I'm not particularly sure what that is, but for jewelers, it might be focusing more on the marketing. They might get really into the technical side of things, like absolutely develop your skills, but making sure you're spending time getting yourself out there to showcase your services is really important. So not losing sight of what's really going to move the needle in your business is huge. And then within that, giving yourself space, so weekly space to really reassess as you're going. So what is working, what's not working, so that there's constant feedback, so that you can again move your business forward in a way that really accelerates you knowing what works.
I think that's so important, that listening to feedback and sort of changing things as you go, because I think sometimes again we feel like we should have all the answers and we don't have all the answers, and then for when we feel like we get it right or we get it wrong, actually it's just about learning what works and what doesn't work, and something might work 1 month or 1 year or 1 week and not another time. But I think if we're open to that learning, that makes a huge difference.
It's all testing. It's all feedback, like it's literally testing. And I think when we learn not to take things so personally, and it's not about us. I was having a conversation with a friend the other day. She was meant to be doing some work with Paris Fashion Week and she didn't get it and took it so personally, and she just completely shut down. So instead of going, oh, well, next, that opportunity, they said I don't have enough experience, which is, again, is nothing to do with her. Completely shut down, instead of there's this opportunity and that opportunity, and how can I get more experience? So I think it's all about how we hold it.
Yeah, definitely.
So yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Number 3, we've already touched on it, but outsourcing and asking for support is huge. Knowing that we don't need to do it all, and knowing that it doesn't have to be the big stuff. It could be, another one that's just come to mind is a food delivery service. So just taking some of this pressure off from having to do all the things. And another thing I always think is really important is, especially women, we've been taught from a very young age to serve. And for a lot of us, that means self-sacrifice, not actually serving, or pleasing, but not serving. And so I am all about service-based business. I'm all about generosity-based business, but I will never go into a conversation with someone and not tell them what they need to hear. because that doesn't serve, that pleases someone, actually it depletes me. So a lot of the time when we're asking for support, it's around expressing to other people, this is how you love me. This is how you contribute. It's not just about you giving to everyone else. You are worthy of asking for what you need.
Yeah. That's so important. I think hard to do, but it really
absolutely
to do.
But it's a total shift, especially for a lot of women. Where I was talking to a friend the other day about this money paradigm that we have, where women are taught to charge less, or because we're not as worthy, but we pay a lot more for the nails and the handbag and all this stuff just to be deemed acceptable.
Yeah.
And so if we want to start undoing that, we do need to look at our own worth a lot of the time and how we see ourselves. And a really simple way of you doing that is just starting to ask for more support.
Yeah. I think there's it feels like the whole other episode on the kind of charging your worth and why we feel very uncomfortable doing that. But that sounds like a really good place to start, as you say, just actually asking people for help.
Yeah, absolutely. And then finally, for me, a huge one that I think is so underestimated and comes back to this self-sacrifice is learning to really lean into self-care. Because all of the evidence suggests that the more we want to go for our peak performance and tap more into our intuition and really show up in a way that serves not only us but everyone else, we actually really need to lean into self-care. Whether it's a physical thing, so whether it's sleep, nutrition, exercise, just making sure that we're really grounded. I'm massive on the nervous system and helping people re-regulate.
Yeah.
It's all huge. Stress is such a major factor of stopping us and keeping us in limitation from really moving into that next level. That's huge from a physical standpoint. From a mental standpoint, we've started doing it today, but just really reframing things and looking at what's true and what's not. And so if you find that there's a particular thought that keeps popping up on repeat, take a look at it and really inquire, if you were looking at it from someone else's point of view, is that really true? Or are you holding yourself back before you've even started?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, I think I think the self-care thing is always the thing that drops off the end, isn't it? It's almost like, here's my to-do list, and at the bottom is the stuff for me. Whereas actually, maybe thinking about it in terms of, this is a really powerful way that I can move my business forward if I actually take this seriously. Then you start to make a bit more time for that sort of thing.
There was a point for me much earlier when I was going through my burnout, and I realized that if I don't put myself first, then everything else suffers. My relationships, my health, my business. And so for me, it's non-negotiable. It should be the first thing that gets ticked off every single morning is spending time on me. Yeah. Because otherwise I don't have the energy to give to everyone else. Or if I do, it'll run out very quickly.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Well, thank you. Thanks so much for joining me. It's been really, really interesting and enlightening just to chat through some of those things. And I think thinking about those sorts of beliefs that, we all have and maybe we don't question, and thinking about, actually, maybe it's time that we did stop and think about whether these ideas and beliefs are holding us back or moving us forward. Would you like to share where people can come and connect with you online, Ruthie? Because I know you've got a website and a mailing list and some downloads and things.
Yeah, so the best place you can find me is probably on my website, which is www.ruthierose.co. And if you go to the resources page, there are loads of things there, including 10 simple ways to upgrade your success in 10 minutes or less. I also have a weekly productivity schedule on how to plan out. So I know we've mentioned planning and prioritizing, so feel free to go and grab that as well. But I'm also on Instagram at Ruthie and Rose. So yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you. Well, we'll make sure those are added to the show notes, just in case you didn't catch that. Thanks so much, Ruthie. And thanks everyone for listening. I hope you found it as useful and interesting as I did. And I hope you have a great week. Bye.